On a cold winter morning, New York buzzed with relentless hustle and bustle. The streets were packed with throngs of people, and the constant blaring of car horns created a ceaseless rhythm, the heartbeat of the city that never sleeps. Sitting quietly in his sleek limousine, Donald Trump stared out the window, feeling an emptiness he couldn't quite put into words. His packed schedule, endless meetings, and heavy responsibilities seemed to press down on his very soul. Amid the chaotic energy, his eyes caught sight of a small church, humbly nestled among the towering skyscrapers. The church, with its weathered red brick walls and a silver cross gleaming under the morning light, seemed to extend a silent invitation. "We're stopping here," he said abruptly to his driver, his voice deep and resolute. No entourage, no media, just him. Stepping out of the car, he inhaled deeply, letting the crisp winter air fill his lungs, as if it could recharge his weary spirit. With measured, purposeful strides, he entered the church, a sanctuary seemingly detached from the frenzy outside, a place where he hoped to find a moment of peace amid the turmoil within himself. Stepping through the weathered wooden doors, Donald Trump was immediately drawn into another world, a world of peace and sanctity. The small church, with its timeless beauty, appeared like a living painting. Soft light streamed through the intricately crafted stained glass windows, filling the space with shimmering hues that danced across the stone-tiled floor. Each ray seemed to carry a whisper of faith, spreading quietly throughout the sanctuary. Marble statues of saints stood tall and dignified, their finely chiseled details narrating stories from the Bible with profound emotion. Every feature, from the delicate veil of the Virgin Mary to the cross held by St. Peter, radiated reverence and holiness. The silence was profound, broken only by the soft, steady breathing of the worshippers lost in their prayers. Trump quietly made his way to the back row, choosing a secluded seat. Bowing his head, he clasped his hands tightly together, as though seeking strength from within. For once, no one noticed his presence, a rarity in his life. Lifting his gaze, he found himself looking up at the crucifix hanging above. The image of Christ and his suffering was illuminated by the ethereal light, as if it were a poignant reminder of sacrifice and unconditional love. In that moment, an unusual sense of calm began to seep into his soul. The clamor of the outside world seemed to halt at the church's threshold, leaving him in a haven of quiet reflection. Closing his eyes, he allowed himself to merge with the sacred atmosphere, searching for something he realized he might have long since lost. The clear, resonant toll of the church bell echoed through the sanctuary, its sound spreading like ripples on a still pond. It was not a hurried, frantic ring, but one measured and deliberate, as if calling each soul present to pause and listen. The congregation, a modest gathering of faithful worshipers, rose quietly from their seats. They moved in unison, their hands clasped before them, eyes fixed on the altar with an unspoken reverence that filled the air. The door to the sacristy creaked open, revealing the priest. His white vestment, adorned with gold trim, caught the soft glow of the stained glass windows, lending him an almost ethereal presence. His movements were deliberate, each step exuding a blend of solemnity and humility. He wasn't just walking, he was carrying the weight of a sacred responsibility. Under the colored light streaming from above, he appeared enveloped in a gentle radiance, as though the very act of stepping into this space connected him to something divine. He reached the altar and turned to face the congregation. His voice, warm yet firm, echoed through the nave, its tone imbued with both compassion and conviction. Let us pray for peace in the world, for unity among all people, and for those who suffer to find solace in God. The words hung in the air like a balm, soothing and healing. They weren't elaborate or ornate. They didn't need to be. Their power lay in their simplicity, in the universal truths they carried. Sitting quietly in the back row, Donald Trump felt their weight settle in his chest. A wave of unexpected emotion washed over him, catching him off guard. He shifted slightly in his seat, as if the words had reached into some hidden, untouched part of his soul. Each phrase seemed to resonate with him on a deeply personal level, not as a man accustomed to power and influence, but as a human being. The words felt like whispers from a distant, yet familiar, place, a reminder of things he had perhaps lost sight of amid the noise and chaos of his life. Peace, unity, compassion. They weren't political ideals or talking points. They were values, foundational and eternal. As the priest moved through the opening prayers, Trump allowed his gaze to wander briefly around the sanctuary. The flickering candlelight, the muted colors of the stained glass, the faint scent of incense lingering in the air. It was a world so different from the one he usually inhabited. Here, in this small church, there were no reporters, no cameras, no decisions demanding his immediate attention. Here, he wasn't a public figure. He wasn't Donald Trump, the businessman or the politician. He was simply one of many, a man seated among other men and women, seeking something greater than himself. The faint strains of a hymn began to rise, the melody soft and delicate at first, like the opening notes of a symphony. The organ's deep, resonant chords intertwined with the voices of the congregation, filling the space with a gentle harmony that seemed to envelop everything. Trump closed his eyes, letting the music wash over him. For a moment, the burdens he carried, the responsibilities, the decisions, the constant demands, felt lighter, as if the music was peeling them away, layer by layer. It was a peace he hadn't known in years, a stillness that he hadn't realized he longed for. In this moment, surrounded by the humble faith of strangers and the sacred beauty of the Massachusetts, he felt something stir within him, a quiet voice, a faint whisper of grace. He remained still, his hands resting on the smooth wood of the pew, his breathing slowing in rhythm with the hymn. The world outside, with all its noise and chaos, felt far away. Here, in the simplicity of this sacred moment, he was reminded of something profound, the immense power of stillness, of faith, and of surrender to something far greater than himself. As the rite of consecration began, a profound silence descended upon the church. It wasn't the silence of emptiness, but one heavy with expectation and reverence, as though the very walls of the sanctuary were holding their breath. The priest, clad in white vestments trimmed with gold, moved with a deliberate grace. He approached the altar and lifted the Eucharist high above his head, his arms steady despite the weight of the moment. His voice broke the silence, resonant and commanding, yet filled with an undeniable tenderness. Each word seemed to linger in the air, carrying an almost tangible weight. "This is my body, which will be given up for you." In that instant, something extraordinary happened. A soft, radiant light streamed down from one of the stained glass windows high above. The beam was not harsh or blinding but warm and gentle, as though it had been sent directly from heaven. It bathed the Eucharist in a vibrant, almost otherworldly glow, illuminating the intricate details of the bread and casting a kaleidoscope of colors across the altar. The interplay of light and color made the sanctuary come alive, transforming it into a place that felt less like the earth and more like a glimpse of the divine. The priest held the Eucharist aloft for a moment longer, his face reflecting the awe and humility of the moment. Slowly, with great care, he lowered it and placed it back onto the paten. His movements were reverent, deliberate, as though he were handling something infinitely precious. But just as his hands released the Eucharist, the inexplicable began to unfold. From the surface of the host, A deep red liquid started to seep. At first, it was just a faint trace, but soon, distinct drops formed and slid slowly down the sides. Pooling in the center of the paten, the liquid, unmistakably resembling fresh blood, shimmered under the ethereal light, its vivid color standing out against the white host and golden plate. The entire congregation froze. It was as if time itself had stopped within the walls of the church. No one moved. No one even seemed to breathe. All eyes were fixed on the altar, where the extraordinary scene was unfolding. The priest, for a brief moment, appeared stunned, his hands hovering in midair as his gaze locked onto the Eucharist. Then, as if a wave of realization swept over him, his expression shifted. His eyes, wide with both awe and faith, filled with tears. He reached out again, carefully lifting the Eucharist once more. His hands trembled slightly, but his voice, when he spoke, was steady and unwavering, carrying the weight of conviction and belief. Brothers and sisters, this is a miracle. Jesus Christ is truly present among us in the Eucharist. The silence shattered. Gasps echoed through the pews, followed by muffled sobs and whispered prayers. Some in the congregation fell to their knees, their hands clasped tightly as tears streamed down their faces. Others bowed their heads, their shoulders shaking as they cried openly. A few simply sat motionless, their expressions a mix of shock and wonder, as if trying to comprehend what their eyes had just witnessed. The light from the stained glass window seemed to intensify, as though emphasizing the sacredness of the moment. It illuminated the faces of those present, young and old, weary and hopeful, all united in a shared sense of awe. For many, the sight of the bleeding Eucharist was more than a miracle. It was a message, a sign that reached into the depths of their hearts, reminding them of Christ's enduring love and unwavering presence. In that holy stillness, the weight of the moment settled over everyone. There was no doubt, no hesitation in their belief. What they had witnessed was not a coincidence or an accident, it was divine. A powerful reminder that even in the chaos of life, God's love endures, reaching out to his people in ways both visible and unseen. The priest held the Eucharist for a moment longer, as though offering it to the congregation and the heavens at the same time. His voice, filled with quiet reverence, broke through the subdued murmurs. Let this miracle be a reminder to us all. Christ is here. He always has been, and he always will be. His words, simple yet profound, rippled through the church, deepening the already overwhelming sense of faith. The bleeding Eucharist, shimmering in the divine light, stood as a testament to the sacred mystery of Christ's presence, a moment that would forever change the lives of those who witnessed it. Donald Trump sat in the back pew, motionless, his gaze locked onto the altar. The sanctuary seemed to close in around him, the world outside forgotten. His eyes were transfixed on the Eucharist, which continued to weep drops of deep red blood, each crimson bead, shimmering under the celestial glow from the stained glass window, seemed alive, as if carrying a message far beyond human comprehension. The sight held him in an almost hypnotic trance. His heart thudded heavily in his chest, a rhythm that echoed in his ears, blending with the silence of the room. A strange, unnameable emotion coursed through him, a mixture of awe, humility, and an unsettling vulnerability. For a man who had spent decades building a life defined by power and success, this moment stripped all of that away. He was not a billionaire, not a former president, not a figure of influence or controversy. In this sacred space, he was simply a man, small, finite, and standing before something infinite. The crimson drops continued their steady descent, pooling gently on the golden paten below. They seemed alive, pulsing with meaning, silently calling to him. Trump shifted in his seat, a knot tightening in his chest. He couldn't explain it, but the weight of his life, every decision, every triumph, every regret, pressed down on him in a way it never had before. He felt both the magnitude of his humanity and the deep longing for something greater, something he had forgotten or perhaps never fully embraced. Unable to resist the pull, he rose to his feet. The movement felt heavy, deliberate, as if every fiber of his being was commanding him forward. He stepped out into the aisle, the soft scuff of his shoes against the stone floor the only sound in the stillness. Each step felt like a journey, a confrontation with the weight he carried, the responsibilities, the mistakes, the pride, and the emptiness that even his greatest accomplishments couldn't fill. As he reached the altar, he stopped, his eyes drawn to the Eucharist. The sight was mesmerizing. The crimson droplets glistened as they fell, silent yet profoundly loud in their significance. The host, radiant and unassuming, seemed to hold an answer he hadn't realized he'd been searching for all his life. He stared, unblinking, his breath catching in his chest. The priest, standing near the altar, noticed the raw emotion etched across Trump's face. His steps were quiet as he approached, his demeanor calm but filled with understanding. He didn't rush, didn't intrude, but when he reached Trump, he placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. His voice, low and steady, carried a warmth that cut through the stillness. "Sir, God is sending us a message. He is always here, even when we are caught up in the busyness and distractions of life." The words pierced Trump's soul like a blade of light, cutting through the layers of self-assurance and pride he had built over the years. He turned slightly, his eyes meeting the priest's. They were glistening now, on the verge of tears that he had held back for so long. He didn't respond. He couldn't. The weight of what he was experiencing rendered him speechless, his usual words and rhetoric stripped away by something far more profound. He turned back to the altar, his shoulders lowering as if the burdens he had carried for decades were finally loosening their grip. His breathing slowed, and his hands, which had so often gestured in strength and authority, now hung quietly at his sides. In that moment, Trump felt something awaken within him. It was as though a door, long shut and forgotten, had been unlocked in his heart. He realized with startling clarity that everything he had achieved, his wealth, his power, his influence, was insignificant in the face of this miracle. Before the presence of God, he was not the man the world saw, but a child, small and vulnerable, seeking the guidance and love of a father. He closed his eyes, letting the silence envelop him. The faint scent of incense lingered in the air, mingling with the glow of the stained glass colors dancing across the altar. It wasn't just the miracle of the Eucharist that had changed him. It was the miracle within his own soul. A part of him, long buried beneath ambition and noise, had been called back to life. He felt it clearly now. This wasn't a moment to witness and move on from. It was a turning point, a call to rediscover something sacred, something he knew he could never again ignore. As he stood there, his heart swelled with an emotion he couldn't fully articulate. It was love, humility, peace, all of it merging into a sense of belonging he hadn't felt in years. This was not just an external miracle he had seen. It was the miracle of grace, and it had found its way into the deepest corners of his soul. The priest, still holding the Eucharist in his trembling hands, stood motionless for a brief moment at the altar. The crimson drops of blood continued to seep from the sacred host, each one falling delicately, as if timed to the stillness of the room. The congregation, stunned into silence, watched with wide eyes and parted lips, their breaths collectively held. The priest's face reflected a profound mix of awe and resolve. He knew what he had to do. With deliberate steps, he moved toward the pulpit, the Eucharist held high in his hands. His every movement carried the weight of what had just transpired, as though he were bearing a message straight from heaven. The sacred host, glowing faintly under the soft, ethereal light of the stained glass windows, seemed almost alive in his grasp. When he reached the pulpit, he turned to face the congregation. His gaze swept across the room, meeting the eyes of each person. Those eyes, shining with both wonder and humility, conveyed a strength fueled by the miracle they had all just witnessed. His voice, when it came, was strong yet tender, resonating with both conviction and compassion. Dear brothers and sisters, today we have witnessed a miracle, a clear and undeniable sign that Jesus Christ is truly present among us in the Eucharist. This is no coincidence. It is a message, a reminder from God that He is always with us, in our pain, in our joy, and even in the moments when we feel lost or unworthy of His love. The words hung in the air, as though they were not merely spoken but carried on some unseen current of divine purpose. The church remained utterly still, save for the occasional soft sound of someone catching their breath. The priest lifted the Eucharist higher, his hands trembling slightly but steady, as though he were cradling the most precious treasure in existence. His voice, now imbued with reverence and the weight of history, continued, "This is not the first time God has revealed His power through the Eucharist. Over 1,200 years ago in Lanciano, Italy, a host was transformed into human heart tissue and real blood, preserved to this very day. Not long ago, in Buenos Aires, Argentina, the Eucharist turned into human flesh and blood, a miracle later confirmed by scientists. And now, today, in this humble little church in the heart of New York City, we too have been chosen to witness this divine wonder." As his words filled the sacred space, a ripple of emotion passed through the congregation. Tears began to stream down the faces of some, their expressions a mixture of joy, gratitude, and disbelief. A woman near the front clutched a rosary to her chest, her lips moving in silent prayer as tears rolled down her cheeks. An older man, stoic and composed until this moment, knelt suddenly, his hands clasped tightly as if holding on to the last remnants of a faith he thought he had lost. The priest's voice softened but did not waver, carrying the tone of a shepherd calling his flock back to the fold. What we have witnessed today is not just a miracle of sight, but a miracle of the heart. It is a call to return to the love and presence of Christ in our lives. Let this moment remind us that His love is eternal, His presence unwavering, and His mercy boundless. He is here with us, not just in this church, but in every moment of our lives. The atmosphere in the church became electric with awe and reverence. Some worshipers fell to their knees, their hands pressed together tightly in fervent prayer. Others bowed their heads, tears dripping onto the wooden pews as they whispered words of thanks and repentance. A child sitting beside his mother looked up at the priest with wide, innocent eyes, his small hands clutching hers as if sensing the magnitude of what was unfolding. The priest lowered the Eucharist slightly, gazing at it for a moment before addressing the congregation once more. His tone now carried a sense of urgency, as though this miracle was not just a gift but a responsibility. Let this miracle not be confined within these walls. Take it with you. Let it light a fire in your hearts, a fire that will guide you to live with love, kindness, and faith. Share this light with the world, and let it shine in the darkest of places, for that is where it is needed most. His words echoed through the sacred space, lingering in the air like a prayer etched into the hearts of everyone present. The room seemed to breathe as one, each person taking in the weight of what they had seen and heard. This was more than a visible miracle. It was a spiritual awakening, an invisible hand reaching into the hearts of each person, rekindling faith that had grown dim. As the priest stood there, the Eucharist still in his hands, the congregation remained in reverent silence. No one dared to move or speak. In the stillness, the weight of the moment settled over them like a gentle but firm embrace. This miracle was not merely an event, it was a call to action, a reminder of the enduring love of God and the power of His presence in their lives. After a moment of profound and sacred silence, Donald Trump slowly rose to his feet. He turned to face the congregation, his eyes filled with emotion. The usual confidence and pride that often defined him were gone, replaced by an uncharacteristic humility. His eyes shone with deep sincerity, and his voice, hoarse yet resolute, broke the quiet. "Ladies and gentlemen, today I have witnessed something that no words can fully describe. A miracle, not only one that we can see before us, but one that has touched the depths of my soul. This is a reminder that faith is not an option, but an essential part of life. We need God, not just to guide each of us as individuals, but to light the way for our nation and the entire world as we face life's greatest challenges." His words, though simple, carried immense power, piercing the hearts of everyone present. Some couldn't hold back their tears. In their eyes, Donald Trump was no longer a wealthy businessman or a controversial politician. In that moment, he was just a man, vulnerable and genuine, seeking redemption and solace from God. Taking a deep breath, Trump continued, his voice trembling but firm. "Today, I not only felt the presence of God, but understood that He is calling us back to love, unity, and compassion. Now is the time for us to stop chasing the trivial and to place God at the center of our lives. Let us take this faith and spread the light of hope and belief to every corner of the world." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the congregation. Not a single person looked away. Captivated by the sincerity in his every word, Trump concluded with a simple yet weighty statement: "We can do nothing without God. Let faith lead us through the darkness, toward the light and hope." His words resonated through the sacred space, carrying the strength not just of a powerful man, but of a soul newly awakened. Soft whispers of prayer filled the air as many knelt, feeling more profoundly than ever the presence of God in that moment. The miracle at the small church in the heart of New York quickly became the center of attention. News of the bleeding Eucharist spread from one person to the next, far beyond the confines of the neighborhood, igniting a blaze of faith that burned brightly in the cold winter air. In a world fraught with turmoil and uncertainty, this miracle carried a powerful message: God remains present and walks alongside humanity. The image of the Eucharist, its crimson drops standing as a testament to God's unconditional love, soon became a symbol of hope. People from all walks of life, regardless of status or faith, flocked to the church, their hurried steps filled with reverence. Elderly worshipers arrived with well-worn rosaries in hand, their trembling fingers clasped tightly in prayer. Families brought their children, pointing to the altar where the miracle had occurred, as though passing down the torch of faith to the next generation. Even those who had distanced themselves from religion found themselves drawn to the wonder of it all. A young man stood outside the church, tears welling in his eyes, whispering, "I'm not sure if I believe in miracles, but here, I feel something like a light in the darkness, a promise that things will get better." The humble church, once a quiet sanctuary in a city that never sleeps, had become a spiritual refuge for thousands. They came carrying their burdens, grief, faint glimmers of hope, or simply the need for a moment of peace in their restless lives. Within the sacred space, prayers rose not only for personal needs, but also for the community, the city, and the world. The miracle of the Eucharist had accomplished something few could have imagined. It rekindled the flame of faith in the hearts of those who had thought it long extinguished. The story of the miracle was more than a supernatural event. It became a source of inspiration, a reminder that amidst upheaval and hardship, God is ever present to guide and console his people. Before leaving the church, Donald Trump approached the priest. His eyes, sharp and commanding on most days, now shone with a rare gentleness, a look of gratitude and awakening. He stood silently for a moment, as though searching for the right words to express the deep emotions stirring within him. At last, he spoke, his voice low and resonant but filled with feeling. "Today, I have learned a lesson I have never truly understood before. God is always here, even when I am consumed by worldly distractions. This miracle has not only changed how I see the world, but has also changed me. Thank you, Father, and thank you to this humble little church for helping me rediscover what I had forgotten for so long." The priest smiled, placing a gentle hand on Trump's shoulder as he replied softly, "Sir, God never abandons us. He is always waiting, patient and loving, ready to guide us back to him when we are ready." Trump nodded, his eyes glistening with what seemed to be a new light, a spark of renewed faith. He stepped out of the church, no longer the same man. The person who had entered burdened by the weight of ambition and power was now leaving with a heart made lighter by hope and humility. Each step on the stone floor felt steadier, not because of authority, but because of the solace and strength drawn from his newfound faith. Outside, New York City remained as loud and bustling as ever, but to him, it felt quieter somehow. He felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, no longer relying solely on his will, but on the guidance of a faith rekindled. From that moment, Donald Trump carried more than just the story of a miracle. He bore a reminder of the power of faith, a torch to light his path and inspire others willing to listen to God's call.